Mozartstrasse, 25 Linz. From the outside, it was a modest building, like many others on the quiet streets of this Austrian city. But on the top floor was the workspace of Leo Einer, a young man whose face was recognized far beyond the city limits. Leo had built a name for himself in the modeling world, frequently appearing in advertising campaigns and fashion magazines. But 18 days ago, Leo vanished without a trace. When authorities eventually forced open the door to his studio, what they discovered was both unexpected and unsettling. The room had been meticulously sealed with vapor-resistant film covering every surface, from floor to ceiling, including walls, doors and windows. The air itself felt heavy, carrying an unusual and pungent odour. When crime scene specialists entered with detection equipment, a reading of 90 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide was recorded, suggesting the environment had been deliberately engineered for a specific purpose. In the centre of the studio, Leo was found. The condition in which he was discovered left investigators deeply puzzled. His face and hands appeared to have been exposed to a strong substance that altered his appearance, making him nearly unrecognizable. It wasn't clear whether this had been self-administered or caused by someone else, but the implication was obvious. Someone had taken calculated steps to conceal both identity and events. The police immediately sealed off the premises. Whoever had been involved had made a concerted effort to eliminate traces, timing things in a way that Leo's discovery would only come well after his disappearance. Investigators quickly confirmed that the last signal from Leo's phone had been captured by a local cell tower on Mozartstrasse at 10:14 p.m., exactly 18 days earlier. Since that moment, the device had been shut off entirely. Neighbours recalled an unusual mechanical noise that night, like a compressor running continuously, and some noted a strange chemical-like scent in the stairwell. Despite a rainstorm raging outside that evening, Leo's jacket, found inside the studio, was completely dry. That small detail told investigators he had not stepped out for several hours before his disappearance. As forensic teams combed the space, they discovered a key piece of evidence: a fingerprint on a glass ashtray. It didn't match Leo's, nor did it belong to anyone close to him. While it wasn't enough to identify someone conclusively, it provided a starting point. It indicated the presence of someone who had been in contact with Leo in the days leading up to the incident. Two individuals quickly emerged as central to the investigation. The first was David Scher, a neighbour and professional makeup artist whose apartment shared a wall with Leo's studio. David reported having last seen Leo about 3 weeks earlier. He claimed Leo had appeared tense and hurried, as if rushing somewhere. Scher's account was calm and seemingly credible, but it lacked detail, nothing that could be confirmed or contradicted. The second person of interest was Max Holzel, manager of a prominent modelling agency in Vienna. Max told investigators that Leo had flown to Milan for a casting and was expected to return the same night. According to Max, Leo's failure to reappear was likely due to scheduling confusion or a last-minute change in plans. But that explanation began to unravel under scrutiny. Phone records revealed that Max had called Leo 3 times on the night he supposedly left for Italy. If Max truly believed Leo was abroad, the calls made little sense. Moreover, neither the airport authorities nor border officials had any record of Leo leaving Austria during the time frame in question. It became evident that the Milan story had been fabricated, either to confuse the investigation or to conceal something deeper. Then came the discovery that altered the course of the case. Forensic specialists examining Leo's belongings found a sleep mask on the nightstand. In the lab, traces of chloroform were detected on the fabric. This particular substance requires special authorization to obtain and could not have come from Leo himself. Using batch identification markers, authorities were able to trace its point of sale, pharmacy code 214187AT. The trail now led directly to the person who had purchased it. This piece of evidence confirmed one thing. Leo had been moved or affected within his own studio, likely while unaware of the situation. Someone had arrived prepared with materials and a plan, and had carried it out with precision. The goal appeared to be not only to delay discovery, but to prevent the full truth from ever being known. As the first phase of the investigation concluded, authorities narrowed their focus to two suspects. David Scher, the quiet neighbour whose proximity gave him opportunity, and Max Holzel, the agency manager whose misleading account raised more questions than answers. Each had access, each had motive, and now each faced growing scrutiny under the weight of the emerging evidence. The central question for police remained: who had gone to such lengths to alter Leo's appearance, and why? The deeper the investigation went, the more it uncovered about the motives and actions of someone determined to stay hidden in the background. The once believable story of Leo's trip to Milan was steadily falling apart. What once seemed like a plausible explanation began to reveal itself as a calculated attempt to mislead authorities. To uncover the truth, investigators began questioning those closest to Leo. His parents, Maria and Thomas Einer, willingly shared their recent messages with their son. One particular message stood out. Leo had written to his mother just a day before his disappearance, informing her that the Milan trip was no longer happening. He didn't provide any details, and for Maria, it didn't raise any alarms. In the fast-moving modelling industry, last-minute cancellations were not unusual. But there was a discrepancy. Leo hadn't formally cancelled his travel plans. When police followed up with Austrian Airlines, they confirmed that a ticket in his name had indeed been issued. Yet a strange detail caught their attention. The ticket had been paid for using a virtual banking card that didn't trigger an actual transaction. This meant the reservation was essentially just for show, a digital footprint meant to support the illusion that Leo was about to travel. This revelation turned the focus back to Max Holzel, Leo's agency manager. Investigators wanted to know why Max had so firmly insisted that Leo had flown to Milan, despite growing evidence to the contrary. The airport had no record of his departure, and the ticket appeared to be a fabrication. When confronted, Max responded with apparent calm. He claimed he was only repeating what Leo had told him, and that he hadn't personally confirmed the flight or itinerary. The investigators, determined to uncover the truth, secured authorization from the Linz District Court to search the offices of Max's modelling agency in Vienna. Among the files and communications, they discovered one document that stood out, a file named milancastingleo.pdf. At first glance, it appeared legitimate. The agency's logo neatly outlined dates, venue information, and even the branding of a well-known fashion label, all standard components of a professional casting notice. But further scrutiny revealed something troubling. The brand mentioned in the document didn't exist. The entire file turned out to be fabricated. Even with this suspicious document in hand, authorities continued to verify every lead. The most surprising turn came when they examined Max's own movements on the night of Leo's disappearance. Records from border control at Prague Airport showed Max had officially entered the Czech Republic at 10:35 p.m., just 21 minutes after Leo's phone went silent. Investigators double-checked travel times and methods. Max had taken Eurocity train 176, which ran a route of approximately 280 kilometres over 3 hours and 40 minutes. The ticket had been purchased in advance, suggesting a planned journey rather than an impromptu attempt to establish an alibi. Everything matched. Max had left Austria by train well before the crucial window in Leo's case, and all available evidence confirmed it. So despite the questionable document and misleading statements, Max Holzel had a confirmed and legally supported alibi. His involvement, while suspicious in some aspects, could not be tied directly to the timing of Leo's disappearance. With Max effectively ruled out, investigators turned their attention to the only other significant person of interest, David Scher, the quiet neighbour and makeup artist. Up to this point, David had managed to stay relatively under the radar. His statements had been calm and general, but now the investigative focus shifted squarely onto him. A closer review of Leo's private messages revealed that his relationship with David had not been as cordial as initially assumed. Some of their exchanges hinted at underlying tension, subtle messages that pointed to unresolved conflict or strained communication. These findings gave investigators a new direction to pursue. By the end of the day, a clearer picture had begun to form. The story of the casting trip had been a carefully orchestrated distraction, and although Max was eventually cleared of involvement in the disappearance itself, he still could not explain who had created the fabricated document or why Leo had been led to believe in an event that never existed. With that mystery still unresolved, investigators redirected their attention to Leo's surroundings in Linz. It soon became clear that the real answers were far closer than originally believed. Each new clue narrowed the focus. Then came a major breakthrough. Investigators began a comprehensive review of the life and activities of David Scher, Leo's neighbour. What they uncovered raised several red flags. Just 4 days before Leo disappeared, Scher had unexpectedly submitted a request for a restricted license to purchase hydrofluoric acid. It was a puzzling move for someone with a professional background in makeup artistry, an industry that had no connection to the use of such substances. The timing alone drew attention, but the nature of the chemical made the request particularly unusual. A search of David's apartment was authorized and carried out. There, investigators discovered a number of concerning items. Among his makeup kits and professional tools, an empty glass bottle labelled chloroform was found. Forensic specialists quickly traced the origin of the bottle and confirmed that it belonged to the exact same pharmacy batch, code 214187AT, as the substance found on Leo's sleep mask. This was no coincidence. For the first time, investigators had clear physical evidence linking David Scher to materials present at the scene. That wasn't all. In the hallway, authorities found shipping documents from a chemical supply company based in the nearby town of Traun. The delivery notes confirmed that David had received a shipment containing 11 kilograms of hydrofluoric acid at 40% concentration and 5 kilograms of sulfuric acid. The forms were signed by Scher himself and dated September 19th, just 1 day after Leo had last been in contact. This timeline strongly suggested a premeditated action. When brought in for questioning, Scher remained composed, though visibly irritated by the attention. When asked about the purpose of acquiring such chemicals, he responded quickly, claiming he intended to use them to clean old photographic cassettes, which he said had developed oxide buildup. It was an explanation that appeared rehearsed, yet it lacked supporting evidence. Investigators had already conducted a detailed search of his apartment. Not a single photographic cassette was found, nor were any of the specific tools or protective materials needed to handle such substances safely, especially hydrofluoric acid, which requires highly specialized, non-reactive equipment. Experts confirmed that attempting to use the acid without such precautions would be impractical and dangerous. David's explanation no longer held up under scrutiny. As the investigation built momentum, a new piece of evidence added an unexpected twist. Forensic experts analyzing one of the chemical containers discovered a second DNA profile. This profile did not belong to Leo or to David Scher. When run through national law enforcement databases, it returned no matches. The discovery indicated the presence of another unknown individual, someone who had not yet been identified in the case. For now, the investigators could only mark this as an important lead. The mystery participant had not yet come into view, but their involvement was now undeniable. Meanwhile, new findings from the forensic lab added another strange layer to the case. Analysts discovered that, prior to any chemical exposure, Leo had been subjected to an elevated heat source. Thermometric analysis of the materials in the room showed exposure to a temperature of around 65 degrees Celsius. The purpose of this heat application was not immediately clear, but it appeared to be intentional and carefully controlled. The possibility emerged that the heating had been part of a separate procedure entirely, perhaps related to staging or altering the environment. Though its exact purpose remained uncertain, it showed yet another level of planning and precision behind the actions taken in the studio. At this stage, David Sher became acutely aware of the mounting evidence. Still, he insisted he had no involvement in Leo's disappearance. Despite this, investigators intensified their efforts to uncover the missing links. A more detailed examination of the ventilation system in the building on Mozartstrasse was initiated. Inside the ductwork, investigators discovered an unusual item, a homemade F7 class air filter, something rarely found in residential settings. Upon microscopic analysis, the filter was found to contain trace particles of cosmetic materials, tiny fibers and pigments typically used in professional makeup. This unexpected clue suggested that someone had used the building's ventilation system either to alter airflow or to obscure chemical activity. It also pointed once again to someone with both access and knowledge of cosmetic materials, someone like David Sher. The threads of the case were beginning to tighten. The investigators were drawing closer to the answers that had eluded them for weeks. Laboratory spectral analysis confirmed a match between the cosmetic particles found in the ventilation filter and the professional products stored in David Sher's makeup kit. The presence of those substances within a specially installed filter made it clear it had been deliberately positioned to trap airborne particles released during the setup or execution of the event. The evidence pointed to a careful and intentional act. Around the same time, forensic experts were able to identify the person behind the previously unknown DNA sample found on one of the chemical containers. The DNA belonged to Eva Meyer, a former assistant and co-worker of David's at a local makeup salon. Interestingly, Eva herself contacted law enforcement after hearing about the case in the news. She voluntarily offered to provide a statement. During her questioning, Eva clearly explained her limited involvement. She had supplied David with empty containers for routine recycling, a common practice in their workspace. Investigators cross-checked her account thoroughly and found no inconsistencies or cause for concern. With her version confirmed, the mystery surrounding the third DNA profile was resolved, and Eva Meyer was no longer viewed as a person of interest. Still, one puzzling element remained unresolved: the unusual heating that had taken place in Leo's studio. To understand it, investigators consulted top forensic specialists from the Biennese Institute of Forensic Medicine. The team offered two possible theories. The first suggested that the heating might have been part of a strategic attempt to dry the environment before chemical exposure, perhaps with the intention of slowing down biological breakdown and complicating later identification. Such a method would indicate a calculated approach to controlling the scene. The second theory was more technical. Specialists believed the heating may have been used to dry the polyethylene sheeting that had been used to line the studio. A dry barrier would have helped trap vapours in the space more effectively, extending their presence and intensifying their impact. From an operational standpoint, this explanation appeared more grounded, and investigators considered it the most likely scenario. Meanwhile, the media began to speculate about Eva Meyer's involvement. Fueled by the initial DNA match, some outlets portrayed her as a possible accomplice. In response to growing public curiosity, police moved to formally verify her whereabouts on the night in question. Detailed checks confirmed that Eva had been teaching a makeup workshop at a vocational training institute on the same day Leo vanished. The class was not only streamed live but also recorded by the school's internal surveillance system, equipment that fully complied with updated security standards. Investigators reviewed the footage frame by frame and verified her attendance throughout the session. Her presence was officially documented, and the suspicion cast by the public was laid to rest. Eva was formally cleared and removed from any connection to the case. As attention returned to David Scher, police forensic teams completed their review of the electronics seized from his apartment. One device, a laptop, yielded a deeply concerning clue. Within its cache, investigators found a search query that read, "Blind with acid but alive." While the system metadata was damaged and the exact date of the search could not be recovered, the fact that the phrase had been typed on that machine was confirmed. This unsettling discovery suggested that the intent behind the act may have been even more severe than initially believed. It hinted at a plan that might have aimed to inflict long-term harm, though not all aspects had come to pass. Regardless, the nature of the search aligned with a deliberate and premeditated mindset. Now the investigators focused on solidifying the timeline and motive. What once seemed disjointed, the filter, the chemicals, the heat, the digital evidence, now formed a coherent and intentional sequence. The chain of events pointed to an act that had been planned down to the smallest detail. 3 months after Leo Egner was found, the investigation neared its conclusion. Authorities had pieced together the entire series of events and the rationale behind them. The evidence clearly and directly pointed to David Scher, Leo's next-door neighbour and fellow professional in the beauty industry. It was a betrayal from someone within his circle, and it had culminated in one of the most disturbing cases in recent memory. In the final phase of the investigation, additional clues helped corroborate the narrative. Unusual green-tinted residue, matching materials found in Scher's studio, was discovered along a secluded ravine behind Rosalia de Castro Street. Subtle drag marks were noted in the soil, indicating that something had been moved through the area, adding one last piece to a puzzle investigators had now fully assembled. It may have been an act that was not only carefully planned, but also rooted in deeply personal emotions, perhaps jealousy, perhaps unresolved resentment. On the night of September 18th, around 9:30 p.m, David Scher invited Leo to his apartment with the suggestion of a creative nighttime photo shoot. Leo, unaware of any hidden motive, accepted the invitation willingly. He had no reason to be suspicious, but once inside, David handed him a sleep mask treated with a chemical substance. From that moment on, Leo had no ability to intervene or resist. Not long after, David received a shipment of substances he had previously ordered. Investigators later confirmed that the materials were delivered shortly after the incident. The acquisition documents, the restricted license and detailed invoices from the Chem Logistics Company served as solid proof of deliberate preparation. Nothing about it appeared spontaneous. Early in the case, a fingerprint had been recovered from an ashtray at the scene. Forensic analysis ultimately confirmed it belonged to Scher. This directly contradicted his earlier claims that he hadn't been to Leo's apartment in weeks. One by one, the claims he had made to investigators began to fall apart. Any effort David had made to construct an alibi was similarly dismantled. Data from bank cards, customer loyalty accounts, and local surveillance records all showed he had remained in Linz continuously from the evening of September 18th onward. He had not left the city, not even briefly, at any point following Leo's disappearance. These patterns further supported the theory that the act had been both localized and intentional. But it was the final piece of digital evidence that deeply unsettled investigators. When they analysed the contents of Scher's laptop, they found a disturbing search query stored in the browser cache, blind with acid but alive. Though the metadata surrounding the query had been corrupted and could not be time-stamped, its presence alone offered insight into David's state of mind. Experts interpreted the search not only as a disturbing reflection of intent, but also as a sign of a deeply fixated and troubled mindset. The evidence, by now overwhelming, indicated that David's goal had not simply been to remove someone from his life. It had been to inflict long-term visible harm. Investigators suggested that jealousy, possibly fueled by professional rivalry and unresolved tension surrounding his former colleague Eva Meyer, played a key role in his motive. Once the full body of evidence had been compiled, law enforcement arranged a formal confrontation. At first, David remained silent, refusing to answer any questions. But when investigators presented all the data, his fingerprints, chemical orders, movement records and digital traces, his composure cracked. In a sudden act of distress, he attempted to harm himself using a pen from the interrogation table. Fortunately, security intervened in time and no lasting injuries occurred. However, the moment left a lasting impression on everyone present. For many, it was the final indicator of guilt. On November 25, 2024, the final court session took place at the Regional Court of Linz under case number 27123. The trial had drawn considerable attention from both media outlets and the public, and tensions in the courtroom ran high. The court found no mitigating circumstances and, after reviewing all material evidence, issued its ruling. According to Articles 75 and 176 of the Austrian Criminal Code, David Scher was found guilty on all charges brought against him. The sentence was clear and unambiguous: life imprisonment. Following the verdict, all documentation related to the case was formally submitted to the Regional Criminal Police Archive of Upper Austria under official index number LKOE 27123. The investigation had reached its conclusion. Leo Einer, an ambitious and talented young man, became a tragic example of how destructive suppressed emotions can become. His story is remembered by his loved ones and the broader community as one filled with promise, unfairly and suddenly taken away. The event served as a stark reminder of how important it is to recognize early signs of emotional distress in those around us. Justice had been served, the truth had been uncovered, and a powerful lesson had been left behind for families, for communities, and for the system itself.